still move around though. It's I feel trapped behind that, and especially when talking, when teaching, I don't want to feel trapped. This is meant to be something where we work together to unravel some aspect of Judaism to see what it has to teach us. Today, very appropriately, because we have multiple generations here in the room, when do you become an adult in Judaism? When do you become an adult?
13.
13. That's what your mother told you. Why?
No? Well,
I told her to say it louder. She didn't say
Okay.
it.
Okay, you didn't say it loud enough. Your mom told you to say it louder, which is going to come back to moms in the math here in a minute. Why is 13 such a famous number for becoming a Jewish adult? I mean, do we really mean that they're adult? I mean, my son just had his bar mitzvah in November. No offense to him. He is a very mature and capable young man. We're not getting him an apartment on his own. We're not sending him off to work. He still has a ways to go before I think most of us would intuitively call him an adult. And I will point out that that is not a new phenomenon. That yes, people may be a little bit older when they're fully adulting in modern American society, but our ancestors were not sending 13-year-olds out to be fully independent adults either. So why 13? Why this magic number?
They know right from wrong.
They know right from wrong.
No?
They ought to know
Oh, they
right
ought
from
to
wrong.
know.
And this is, it's a very societal number. Actually, the 13 is a secondary measure. The actual number isn't a number. It depends on the individual child, at least back in the pre-Talmudic days. You would check for signs of puberty to see whether or not the child had matured to that point of puberty. And at that point, as any parent will tell you who has helped or tried to help a child through that transition, all bets are off on how they're going to behave and the trouble they might get themselves into. And that means that the society needs to put the weight of responsibility for trying to keep the commandments, the mitzvot, which remember are more than just keeping Shabbat, it's also not stealing, murdering, or doing other types of things, onto their shoulders to make them understand, no, you really are responsible for getting it right from now on for yourself, even if we know you, like every other human being, is going to mess up. So the society needs that as a benchmark to hold somebody accountable for their behaviors when their behaviors really are going to no longer be entirely up to their parents' decisions. Right? A 10-year-old will behave very differently than the 13-year-old despite only a 3-year difference. And a 10-year-old will listen to their parents very differently than the 13-year-old will listen to their parents. And that's not any slur against 13-year-olds, it's simple biology, which our tradition recognizes. But our tradition also recognizes that's not the only bench of maturity. We focus so much on the bar or bat mitzvah that sometimes we forget that our tradition has other milestones for maturity that are almost as important. Yes, this is the biggie because of the whole responsibility thing. But there are other things that as parents we should be tracking and as individuals we can learn from. For example, in this particular day of Daf Yomi, we are beginning Chagiga, the section dealing with many of the festivals. And in the process of dealing with the festivals, the question comes up, how young is a child when they become obligated to the Shalosh Regalim, to the 3 pilgrimage festivals, and need to walk to Jerusalem? Right? At what age do we begin saying, you shouldn't be leaving that kid at home, that kid needs to go to Jerusalem with the adults? Anybody got a guess?
5.
We've got a few different options here in the room.
It's got to be younger than 13, 12, 13.
12, 13?
I think
All right,
probably-
younger or older than bar mitzvah?
I'd say a little bit younger than
Younger.
We got one argument for older, one argument for younger. It's actually a lot younger. Between the schools of Shammai and Hillel, there's a debate. Beit Shammai says that as soon as they're old enough to sit on their father's shoulders, they are old enough to have to go up to Jerusalem.
That's a really slow walk, but yeah.
For the dad, yeah, that's a really slow walk. Whereas Beit Hillel says no. From the time they are old enough to hold dad's hand and walk up to Jerusalem, that is when they are required to, and you are required to take them to Jerusalem with you. You can't just leave them home because they're too young. That is an important benchmark of When will this child begin the experience of going up for the massive national festivals and having that experience? We don't want to leave that too late. But on the other hand, you don't put it so early that the child will be overwhelmed. I'm speaking from personal experience, having watched my then just 1-year-old daughter be completely blown out of the world in not a good way at her first Purim experience. You want to make sure that the child is ready for the hubbub of the festivals. But then we can creep up the time a little bit. How old does a child have to be to have to sleep in the sukkah during the holiday of Sukkot, weather and mosquitoes permitting? I'll give you a hint. It's not 13, and it's not old enough to hold someone's hand. It's somewhere in between.
6, 7?
See? You're not picking up on the clue here. It has nothing to do with a number.
Oh.
We will get to another number at the very, very end, but
When they're
13.
not wetting the bed.
What?
When they're not wetting the bed.
When they're not wetting the bed. Very close. Very close. The actual text that comes in the Talmud is when the child wakes up wakes up at night and doesn't call out for their mother repeatedly. Right? When a child will get up and go, ah, Mom! And then go, oh, no, it's okay. I'm good, and go back to sleep. Very importantly, it doesn't say the child doesn't call out at night, but that it doesn't call out repeatedly.
So, tush.
It depends on the kid. And that's the point. It depends on the kid. These benchmarks, including the bar mitzvah, like I said, which was a physical inspection way back in the day, were dependent upon the child and the family. They were dependent upon the maturity, and some children might be able to hold your hand and walk to Jerusalem, but they couldn't get through the night. Other children could get through the night, but maybe they would be overwhelmed by the whole march to Jerusalem. Each child was a little different. And the Talmud is telling us that we need to raise them and treat them a little different according to where they are as they continue to develop. Now, there is only one last major milestone for true adulthood, and that is the age of military service, which is, biblically, not in America, where they draft you at 18. I'll give you a hint, it's higher.
22.
20. I'll take the first number. You don't need to add any more, right? 20, right? If you read through the census in the Torah, we measure the number of people that are 20 because that is the age of military service. They are preparing for war. It is a draft count that is going on there. And interestingly enough, our sages also teach us that it is only at 20 that a Jewish soul truly becomes responsible in the eyes of heaven for their behavior. That yes, the society needs to make sure that 13-year-olds aren't running around burning down the buildings. But God understands that 13-year-olds are a little crazy, and so are 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19-year-olds. But there is a certain point where heaven does say, okay, from now on, these sins really count in the eyes of heaven. Now, your crimes count for the society before that, but your soul is still growing, and God does not hold it against you that you have had the indiscretions of youth up until that point of 20. Very interestingly enough, which is now, as modern neuroscience and psychology is telling us, is about when the brain finally does begin to firm up in its full sense of personality and the higher cognitive functions of being able to understand, interpret, and analyze situations and make at least reasonable decisions. Not that every 20-year-old makes good decisions, but they are at least based on some reason. Our tradition recognizes that a human is always going to be growing in their own way throughout these decades. And that should make us remember that a human will continue to grow throughout the decades that come later. But it is not a done process. There are continual milestones, not just how you wake up at night, not just how you hold someone's hand, but also how you live, what you have learned, what you have grown to come to be able to do. We should continue to set these milestones for ourselves, not judging against the benchmark that someone else has, not judging purely against some arbitrary number, but judging ourselves by, am I able to do more than I did yesterday? Am I growing in a direction that is making me a better me and making me a more capable me in the eyes of Torah, in the eyes of the community, in the eyes of myself? With that as our progress, then maybe we will continue to grow up and we'll do so in joy, happiness, and health. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.